Welcome to this latest Travel Weekly Roadmap to Recovery webcast. I'm Ian Taylor of Travel Weekly, and I'm joined today by Susan Deere, Director of Industry Relations for Abta, Clive Wratten, Chief Executive of the Business Travel Association, and Joss Croft, Chief Executive of UKinbound. Welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining me. You represent the three sectors: outbound, inbound, corporate. You all speak directly to government. We've had a partial restart of travel, but things are largely at a standstill and the summer's running out. So the industry, all the sectors, is looking to the government to widen the possibilities for travel and support the sector through the winter. So we're going to discuss those things in a second. But first, Joss, if I can start with you, what sort of July and August has the inbound sector had?
Well, put simply, it's been disastrous. There has been no inbound. I mean, that's not wholly true in the sense that there has been a trickle of some very brave Germans that are travelling around the country at the moment, reported by some of our members. But it's been absolutely disastrous. We kind of saw from Visit Britain's own predictions in terms of inbound tourism that they're predicting about a 60% fall by the end of the year, but that was based upon a very short quarantine period. So we've seen, quarantine has had a massive impact. 92% of all the people that come to the UK come for less than 14 days. So the thought of a 14-day quarantine has naturally put people off. And just at the time that we were kind of starting to think about these implementation of travel corridors and a wider quarantine, a lot of European markets, they make up 66% of all the visits into the UK, they were having their travel restrictions lifted and they were deciding where to go. And because we were putting ours up at that point, the UK was very much off the map. So it's been a very, very challenging time for anyone involved in inbound tourism. And of course, a lot of the people within our membership are the tour operators, and they don't have that opportunity to pivot to try and get any domestic business because that's just not the way that they're set up. So they're really, really struggling at the moment. And some of the results that we've seen from some of our surveys are showing, some really massive potential redundancies. And it's not just the redundancies within the tour operators themselves. There's a question of business survival there as well. And it's not just for them, but if you imagine that the international consumer and potential international visitor has very, very little awareness of what there is to do in the UK outside London, it's these tour operators who drive regional economies in tourism, and certainly in terms of inbound. As I say, if these tour operators aren't around, there's nobody that can quickly jump into their place, given that they are very market specific. They have the relationships already with international businesses. So, I think it's going to be a desperately hard time for British tourism. And international visitors typically spend 3 times what domestic visitors do on their trip. So again, any domestic tourism pickup is not going to be to the extent that it is going to be able to secure jobs in regions and across the whole of the visitor economy. So very, very hard.
Okay. And just the summer's clearly key for inbound, I suppose, as much as it is for outbound. But is it, if there's no pickup before the end of the summer, is that it for many companies, or can they still hope to see visits through the winter if things do open up a bit?
It is very seasonal inbound, like domestic and indeed like outbound tourism as well. There's about 25% of all the visits that come to the UK come between October and December. But a lot of that is corporate travel that would normally be happening. That again, we'll hear from Clive in a minute. But there's a real challenge there on the business travel. So the seasonal nature of it means that these are businesses that really didn't receive much business from December right through until January, February time. Then March, COVID kicked off. They've not really seen much business, and now they face what is in effect a third winter in a row. And it's going to be very, very difficult for them to get through to that period in 2021, when we are hoping that some of the demand from this year would have shifted to next year and a certain element of pent-up demand. So it's at the moment, sort of when it comes to looking at working our way out of this terrible situation, I think we're in 2 phases. The first of which, frankly, is about survival and getting these businesses through until March of next year, and then starting to look, what does recovery mean at that period of time as well.
Okay, so we'll come on to how businesses get through the winter in a minute. Susan, if I can come to you, we had a restart to much of the Med in July, and then we've seen Spain, France, and so on join Portugal off the quarantine exemption list. Was it really worth restarting in order to have this stop-start? Would it have been better to have just written off the summer?
Well, I think that ultimately is going to be down to each individual business to look at in hindsight. There were some businesses who decided that it was not worth them restarting under the circumstances, and they decided not to. Others, took that risk assessment and decided that it was worth it, if only to get some sales this summer, obviously to keep their brands in the public domain. But absolutely no question, this summer has been incredibly, incredibly challenging, not just because of Spain and France, but because of all the other destinations as well that are not on either the FCO exemption list or the DfT Home Office list.
Did the government signal a restart too soon on reflection? I mean, it seems, for example, that it might have got it right on the Balearic Islands when it took them off the quarantine exemption list along with Spain, because Germany has now, declared the Balearics along with mainland Spain a high-risk area.
Well, we went into the FCO Global Travel Advice came out in March. That was a substantial time before kind of summer started. And, we know there are destinations that are 100% reliant on the summer season. They don't have a winter season. So they were obviously, very keen for a restart as soon as possible. Do I think the government did it too early? No, I think they put some thought into what was happening. And as Joss said, Europe was at that time when we were looking at restart, they were already 2 to 3 to 4 weeks ahead of us in the process. And so announcements were coming out of Europe about reopening borders, restarting travel, the German travel market started, Netherlands, etc. And, we followed on after that because of the way we were in terms of our own domestic lockdown. So, no, I think great consideration was given. And as we can see, from the fact that the global travel advice has not lifted, the global travel advice is still in place with exemptions. So, yeah.
Okay. We'll come back to travel advice and so on. Clive, what are the prospects for corporate travel restarting in September? Not a lot of corporate travel would be happening now, obviously.
No, I mean, it's pretty bleak, to be honest with you, for September and beyond that. As you say, the opening and closing scenario is really removing any confidence that corporates had in getting back to travel. On top of that, many of them are still working on how they get their staff back into their offices in whatever format that may be, whether it's a hybrid of 3 days in, 2 days out, it's changing. So until we get people back in the offices in London, that's also another inhibitor to getting back to business travel. But yeah, the prospects right now, and I've spoken to a lot of corporates over the last couple of weeks, is that there were many that were kind of looking at September to get going, and clearly some will if they're able to travel. But many were saying now to the end of the year, and those that were at the end of the year are now talking about end of Q1 next year before they get back travelling. So that's the statement now. If things change and we get, whether we'll talk about later testing or even a vaccine, then of course things will come forward. But right here and now, the winter for the corporate industry, as it looks for the leisure and the inbound industry, looks pretty bleak.
Is there any more appetite for short haul international travel than long haul, given that most destinations seem to be off the map anyway at the moment? Long haul. Yeah,
I mean, there is appetite there, but then there's not the air links or the transportation to get to those places, or you can't get in. I mean, clearly, short haul is easier, and we've seen some travel for France when they were able to, when it came out. But domestic travel, even for business travel, is slow getting started. Without talking too much, trains have not reached the levels that I think the government or any of us were expecting, particularly long-haul trains, which my industry kind of looks after a little bit more. So I think, there is a little bit more opportunity for the short-haul domestic, but even that is way behind where we hoped it would be.
Yeah. When we spoke recently, you said that the reimposition of quarantine to Spain had damaged confidence in the corporate sector, but I suppose the removal of the Netherlands and France was more damaging in terms of corporate travel directly, because you've lost Charles de Gaulle and Schiphol as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's just piling on top of bad news on top of bad news ultimately. And, it's just the spectre of more coming down the line that is really destroying the confidence. Yeah, two key markets which we were really fighting for air routes to be, or train routes with Eurostar clearly into both of those, are now taken away, and that just really has destroyed what little confidence there was coming back.
Okay, and you've warned that 10,000 jobs could go at TMCs. Is that how it looks really without support?
Absolutely, I'm afraid. We know that we're already seeing, LinkedIn is a dreadful place to look at a little bit now. But, it breaks my heart, a number of colleagues and friends in the industry that are losing their roles right the way across. We're saying over 50% of our staff are at risk, but that's now not at risk. That's beginning to come to fruition. Big numbers departing from the industry. And we already have some TMCs who have gone into a second round of consultation because they were hoping to see some pickup in September. So, 10,000 jobs gone just in this part of the industry. I don't think that's a number that is too far away from where it could end up unless something happens drastically in the near future.
Okay, let's talk about what needs to happen then. And if I can stay with you for a minute, Clive, you put a proposal for travel corridors and testing and so on, and a trial some months ago, back in June, I think, to the government. And we haven't seen, apart from the travel corridors list, we haven't seen much movement really. I wonder what the response was to your proposal, and how you see things now with the speculation around, will there be one test at airports, two tests, and so on?
Yeah, I mean, as all of us will know on this screen, that working with government and the sheer size of this crisis means that nothing was going to happen quickly, because every industry was fighting for noise and for help and for solutions. What I would say is, for us, they've been pretty engaged. It hasn't moved as quickly as we'd like, but a lot of this is based around information of fact that has to be gathered. So we were pleased clearly when the travel corridors came through, which I think was united around this screen as we look at it. Everybody been fighting for the same thing, and we got that through. And we continue to engage with them on a regular basis and on a weekly basis. Again, I'm sure both Susan and Joss are doing in talking in the background to help them and guide them to where we need to get to. Unfortunately, it's not happening as quickly as we like, but I think the industry has had some successes over this period, and we will continue to keep fighting for that. And all the time, what is really important in our opinion in the BTA is that you're engaging and collaborating with them, offering solutions, just not saying it's an issue, sort it for us. And that's what you keep coming up, because there is no single solution to this. You go out and you think you have an idea that will work, and then for some reason, because in this fast-changing crisis things move very quickly, is that we have to move on. And, we've come out with our latest one just on support for our industry, which is extending furlough beyond October. We understand that furlough in its current form cannot continue forever. You can't keep handing cash out. It's all our cash, it's taxpayers' cash. But to come up with a solution that says, keep helping us out, because we need the skilled staff with this industry to build the UK economy's recovery. And when our members start turning a profit again, they will pay it back at 10% of their profits each quarter. So it becomes cost negative to the government eventually, and it's a solution that we want to get down and talk to. So again, we've had some acknowledgement with kind of pursuing those conversations, and we'll continue to do so.
Okay, so you wrote to the Chancellor and to the Business Secretary with that proposal,
and the Transport Secretary,
and they've come back and said, what great idea, or
no, they haven't come back and said a great idea. It's just on there, the agenda for discussions that we're having, and I've got some discussions this week to take it on further, and it feeds into a lot of the working parties which we've all been on around that. That is work going on in the background to come up with those solutions. And I think, that's what's important for people watching this to understand, is there is constantly suggestions and ideas and industry talking to government the whole time, and some work and some don't. And that's how we will continue to work.
Okay. Let's come back to furlough and replacements for furlough, if there are going to be any, and just stick with the opening up travel, international travel for a moment. Susan, Abta's advocated regional travel corridors as a way of opening things out a bit. How would they work, and where are discussions on those with the government?
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking about taking a regional or more risk and targeted approach for months now. I lead the Abta relationship with the FCO, and then of course, my colleague Luke, who heads up the public affairs team, leads on the discussions with DFT, DCMS, Home Office. So we've been discussing with all of those departments these options. In terms of the regional approach, I mean, the examples obviously are Portugal and Spain with the islands, particularly in terms of the Canaries, which may well still have a winter season ahead of it, and of course the Balearics. And it's really about not adopting a whole country approach to the risk assessment, and about looking at that regional data which is being published, and there. But I think, in terms of the advice, and particularly looking at the FCO advice and the travel corridors, I think what's important to remember is that those two things are looking at two different areas of risk. So the FCO is focused on the risk to UK nationals abroad. So what is the risk going to be to those travellers, be they business travellers, be they leisure travellers? Whereas the DFT Home Office is looking at what is the risk to the UK as a whole of importing infection. And those are two different things. And obviously the epidemiology and, the cases, the numbers of cases per 100,000 and everybody is quoting at the moment, those form part of it. But it's really important to know that that is not the only consideration. So with the FCO and opening up regions and things like that, they will also be looking at things like the capability of public health in that area in case something does happen with an outbreak, that people need medical support. They'll also be looking at the transport capacity. So as we know, when we were coming into this crisis in February and March, when destinations were shutting down and requiring customers to be brought back to the UK, looking at what transport will be available and the capacity to bring all UK nationals back, that will be part of the FCO's consideration there.
Okay, so there are good reasons for the divergence between the Foreign Office advice and the country's advice and the DFT Home Office list, because that caused...
Yes, although the last couple of changes have actually been coordinated. So for the last 2 weeks of announcements, they have actually been coordinated in terms of the FCO travel advice and the travel corridors list changing within the same announcement.
And we seem to have settled into this weekly process, don't we, of a decision on a Wednesday from the government, an announcement late on Thursday for something that kicks in on Saturday or the following Tuesday, with the Foreign Office in line. Is that broadly working now? It's still not entirely clear why the change for France, for example, had to be at 4 a.m. in the morning on Saturday.
Yeah, well, that's obviously something we're discussing with government in terms of advance warning and when changes happen. I think, yes, absolutely, the weekly announcements have happened for the last couple of weeks, and there is definitely a weekly review process where, you get the expert group looking at the epidemiology, and then the officials are going to look at what advice can come from that epidemiology and the other things that I've mentioned, and that then goes to ministers for further discussion. But I don't think we should be complacent and think that things could not happen in between those reviews. I know certainly from my discussions with the FCO, there is a constant review process taking place. So I don't think we can assume that it will purely be weekly. If there was a significant spike or something occurred in relation to a particular destination, whether that be, to allow it to come on the list or off the list, I think we can't assume that that wouldn't happen in between the weekly reviews.
Yeah, okay. And just on the travel corridors, what are the challenges with that? It seems, I can see how opening corridors to the Canaries would be fairly straightforward because of the distance. But having regional variation in advice, say to Malaga differing from Madrid or Madrid differing from Barcelona, would be much more challenging, wouldn't it? So would regional corridors really only work in very specific circumstances?
I think you would have to look very carefully at the approach. And of course, this is something that certainly Abta has been asking for from the beginning. And as I'm sure have my colleagues here, is actually having criteria for the decision-making, published criteria, so that businesses can plan ahead. But yes, absolutely. I mean, one of the issues that has been apparent with Spain has been the fact that certain regions of Spain have obviously been experiencing spikes in the infection rate. And, there's been a concern that travellers from those areas may travel domestically within Spain to the other areas which are not experiencing spikes. And that can obviously affect the public health situation in those, in even the islands, the Balearics and the Canaries. So there's a lot of consideration that has to be given to those areas when you're looking at the regionalisation. But I think, I'm not an expert. It doesn't mean it can't be done, though. And I think once the criteria are more transparent, then it will be, much easier for businesses to plan ahead to what areas may become available.
Okay, let's come to transparency in a moment. Joss, can I ask you about the UK inbound attitude to some of these measures? For example, the proposals on testing. We hear a lot about testing, calls for testing. Some countries have introduced tests, a single test, double test, free test, paid for test, etc., etc. I mean, what would you like to see, and what do you think we might see? Because the government seems set on a two-test regime at the moment, which might be off-putting in terms of cost and still having to quarantine.
Yeah, I think realistically, the testing is much. The two-test system, which I think a single test is, I'm no epidemiologist, so I don't know, but I'm imagining that one test is not going to be sufficient because you could potentially have caught it at the time of testing and then it would only show up later on. I think the two testing will definitely help in terms of the reduction of time that people need to self-isolate when they get back to the UK. Probably not going to be hugely helpful in terms of inbound tourism, given that a 10-day self-isolation is almost as bad as a 14-day self-isolation. If one was to think of oneself travelling overseas, it wouldn't matter whether it was 10 days or 14 days, you simply wouldn't go. But I think, I've heard discussions that might be happening on the other side of the world where they're looking to see whether there aren't technologies that could be put into place that would allow the tracking and monitoring of people that have been tested and tested multiple times. So, for example, upon visa application, upon booking travel, upon arrival at the airport, upon arrival in the destination, and then potentially during the tour of the host destination that they're visiting as well. So this type of idea of some type of digital health passport that keeps a record of your tests. But realistically, I know that there have been some challenges in terms of getting the tracking, testing and identifying within the domestic market itself, amongst us UK nationals. So that is probably quite a long way off before they're able to do it. The new kind of tracking system and the app that's being tested at the moment in the Isle of Wight, I saw a demonstration of it the other day. It looks very compelling, and I'm sure that will help, and that will be available for international visitors when it gets rolled out, hopefully later on in the year. But I think testing, the advantage of testing is it does allow, to Susan's point, a lot more of a targeted approach than the broad brush that is the country falling into the quarantine. If you look at inbound tourism, 7 out of the top 10 markets that come to the UK in terms of their spend are subject to quarantine. So you can take that as 70% of all inbound spend is being restricted into the UK at the moment through quarantine. So anything that can get us above and beyond that point has got to be helpful for the businesses that are involved in inbound tourism.
Yeah, sure. Clive, it sounds as though testing is going to be a way to relax things this side of vaccine, but not imminently. Do you have a view on the 1 test, 2 test? You've proposed a trial of testing on specific corporate travel corridors, if you like, haven't you?
Yeah, well, I think the 2 test is a absolute barrier to entry for the corporate travel industry at 5 days. It may be a necessary step, although I think there are single test options that are becoming available. I think actually Matt Hancock's was just announced on BBC before we came on here that there's some testing going on, watered down around that scenario, which is encouraging. I think that's what we need. We really believe in reciprocal testing. So should the UK government test its citizens leaving and then the country returning test their citizens, send them either theirs or ours back healthily, that would seem to be a sensible approach to move forward. And I think testing has to be the actual option that we have for opening up travel routes in the future. We've kind of talked about it right from the very beginning and still believe it is the right way to go. And without being too selfish, we believe that the business travel industry is much more kind of risk managed. Our TMCs have been tracking travellers for years already. We have corporate travel policies that mandate what travellers need to do. So it is a bit more of a managed environment. And we were suggesting, use it as a test bed for the whole of the travel industry, because you can use it in a much more defined and managed way on particular routes. And I totally agree with the colleagues here that we need this regional approach, not just closing down whole markets. And we also have kind of said that we feel that the advance notice on the closing down or the introduction of quarantine needs to be more transparent. I know we're going to talk around that a bit more, because it is really just, when you're saying things like 36 hours at 0400, talking to people, that just breeds concern in them. It's the middle of the night and it's really quick, and therefore it must be really dangerous, and I need to get out. So how do we work with the government to give a defined reason? That is always going to be up for change, because again, as we discussed, some things suddenly happen, but that's an exception. If we make the rule that everybody understands it, we can start using testing, we can start using corridors, all of these things to start opening up travel and making people feel confident, because that's what it is, and protecting public health at the same time.
You've advocated, or poised to advocate, 3 tiers of FCO advice, I think. Is that right? With sort of freedom to go, travel with caution, advice against all but essential travel.
Well, we believe the FCO travel advice, I'm talking about the outbound travel advice here, hasn't changed for years, and the world has changed, particularly in the last 5 to 6 months. And the stop-go kind of scenario doesn't really work anymore. So again, in the spirit of offering solutions to the government to allow us to get back travelling safely again, it's to say, we'll introduce a 3rd level, which is travel with caution, which firstly means that the government insists that the insurance industry insures under that particular criteria, but it also then has people understanding from travel management companies, from normal travel agencies, are there to work with their travellers. So it's under caution, but we're here, we're watching it, and we can bring you back, because we also know there's a given time by when the announcement's going to come in. So it's a suggestion there to allow us to get travelling again, but allowing the industry, which manages this really well, whether it's corporate or leisure, to work with their clients to make them feel safe and know they're going to be able to get them back in time should another one quarantine come in.
Susan, could you see that working? And is that something that the Foreign Office would be interested in exploring?
Well, we did actually do a review. I can't remember exactly what year, but it's certainly within the last 4 years. where Foreign Office did a review, which we and many others provided input into, where they were looking at the levels of advice, because obviously, you know, we're not the only ones that do travel advice for our citizens. There are examples all around Europe, there's Canada, etc., and all of them operate in a slightly different way, and some of them do have multiple tiers. They have, you know, 4 tiers, and we did look at all of those options, and after the review, the conclusion was that the current one works. It works well. Now, obviously, that was pre-COVID. Whether the FCO would decide to undertake another review now, possibly, potentially. But I think, you know, our first target, I guess, in terms of the FCO advice has to be to get away from this global advisory against travel back to individual country advice in the first instance, because obviously a global advisory against travel, you know, unprecedented from my experience when I've been in the travel industry, the advisory has always been destination specific. So first step is to get away from the global advisory. Let's go back to looking at the advisory for each country. And then I think one of the issues that's always been discussed, you know, about FCO travel advice is the important thing is to give travellers, be they leisure travellers, be they business travellers, the information so that they can make an informed decision on whether they choose to travel or not. You know, people do travel even when the FCO advises against travel, and I'm talking about leisure travellers and business travellers. But what's important is they need to be given the information to allow them to make an informed decision on, you know, whether they are willing to travel under those circumstances. So, yeah, certainly, you know, I can't say that I've spoken to the FCO in recent years or months about the moving to different levels of advisory, but it was something that was considered within the last 4 years.
Yeah. Well, there are 3 tiers now, aren't they? There's the green, amber, red, which appears to tie in with the DFT traffic light system, but doesn't. But
yeah, so it's the
system.
Advise against not all but essential travel, advise against travel, and then, you know, just the third one, the green one is, you know, the FCO does not say to anybody it is safe, you know, even if it's green, they are not saying it is safe for you as an individual to travel to that destination. They are saying we are not advising against non-essential travel, and they're, you know, they're published criteria for non-terrorist related advice on the all but essential travel is that if there is an unacceptably high risk to UK nationals of travelling to that destination, then they will advise against travel in those circumstances. So it is the detail and the content of the FCO travel advice that is critical to allow people to make informed decisions, and the moving away from global advisory, blanket advisories, back to country specific and indeed, you know, as we've all discussed, region specific information.
Yeah, that's an understandable aim. Move away from a global advisory, but realistically, every country in the world has a global advisory in place at the moment, don't they? You know, and the EU has a global advisory. It's recommendation, and it's not, you know, it's guidance, but it does with a limited list of countries.
Limited list of third countries. Yeah. I mean, I'm not in it.
We're not going to move away from that, are we? In the short.
Well, not in the next week, I would imagine, Ian. I mean, none of these solutions or possible solutions or suggestions that are being discussed are going to occur overnight. But what we need to look at is what do we need as an industry in order to move towards a more cohesive restarting of outbound travel. And that is one of the factors that will allow businesses to plan more easily.
Okay. Can I ask each of you, and maybe Susan, it's you I should start with, about the fact that the system at the moment is opaque, isn't it? And everybody's saying we need more transparency, business needs more transparency, travellers need more transparency, and so on. but there are risks attached to that in terms of the impact on consumer confidence. If you know, so now we know, thanks to Grant Shapps, that infection rate of 20 per 100,000 is enough to trigger, or one of the triggers for a country coming off the quarantine exemption list. You're getting league tables in the newspapers every morning, as countries move up the list and so on. That's not helpful, is it? So do we only want so much transparency, and is there a limit to it?
You're right, Ian. I mean, it's not helpful. And this goes to what I was talking about before, the issue of, there being a range of factors that are being considered. Now, we know some of them, but we don't know all of them. But certainly the speculation focused specifically on what you were talking about, the case numbers, is unhelpful. And it does damage consumer confidence, because if they are seeing this constant speculation about what countries are going to come on the list, what countries are going to come off the list, without the people who are doing that speculation actually knowing the criteria that go along with that, then that is unhelpful. But that is why transparency of all of the criteria would be more helpful, because at the moment everybody's focused on one, and we know for certain that is not the only factor which is being considered.
Okay. Joss, more transparency?
I mean, ultimately, you'd want all of the medical advice and the data set behind it published, so that people can take some of the informed decisions that Susan was saying. But I think it is the specific focus on certain elements rather than the whole, which is probably dragging down some of the consumer confidence. Of course, when it comes to inbound, it's the perceptions of safety that matter as much as the reality as well. We have our own issues with our own regional and local lockdowns, the Manchesters of the world, the Aberdeens of this world, that will be putting people off travelling to the whole of the UK, let alone just those areas as well. So perceptions become terribly important when you're looking at international travel and travel into the UK.
Okay, Joss, while you're speaking, can we move on to what the sectors need from the government in terms of support now through the winter? You've called for a tourism resilience fund, as well as some relief on rates and so on. Can you just explain what you're calling for and how urgent it is?
Sure. Okay. Well, as I said earlier on, I think we can break it down into two phases: the survival through until the end of Q1 next year, and then onwards in terms of recovery. And you could look at those in two separate ways. Of course, it should be recognised that even under the current government support, my members are absolutely hugely thankful to government for the job retention scheme, but the reduction, the phasing out of that towards October is a real worry to them. There were parts of government support that were announced by the Chancellor at the beginning, excuse me, that never materialised in support for a lot of my members. So when the Chancellor said that those businesses involved in hospitality, leisure and tourism would receive rate relief and grants, he didn't mean businesses involved in leisure, tourism and hospitality, because coach operators, for example, the tour operators, never received any of that rate relief. And that's a huge outstanding miss in terms of support for the industry that would have made a huge difference. I think the issue in terms of job retention scheme is that we have had public statements that the government is neither minded to continue that past October, nor to make a sector-specific exemption for for particular industries and sectors. So I think, albeit recognising that it has been a huge help, and that is what a lot of my members want to see continued, I think we need to see something that recognises support for the employed, for those people that are doing work, as much as for those people that aren't doing the work. I think we need to see it for industries that have no opportunities elsewhere. We're not like the supermarkets that have taken millions and millions of pounds out of the government through the furlough scheme, yet have continued to operate, probably done reasonably well, and can shift their businesses online. That isn't the case for inbound tourism or outbound tourism or business travel. So I think we need to get greater understanding. I'm sure we're going to talk about issues around government engagement in a minute, but we need to get greater understanding from government that this is the third largest service export after business and financial, and that we need the support to keep what would be normally good businesses going. So whether that be a tourism resilience fund, which people can dip into if they've seen a particular decrease in turnover, whether it is an extension of the job retention scheme, I don't care what it's called. I don't think anyone cares what it's called. But if it allows these businesses to survive and to continue to employ their staff, then that's what the industry needs. Sure, things like the Eat Out campaign have been good, but it's only really August. The VAT up until the 12th of January has been good, but it's very short term. And I think we're really looking for some direct intervention from government, be that a biddable pot that people can be able to apply for. That would be beneficial for government because, of course, that's not open-ended in the same way that JRS is potentially. But we also need to see some rate relief, some holidays. We need to see the government change its advice to local authorities on the grants and rate relief scheme. So it's no one thing. But again, I think it is moving beyond thinking of just purely furlough and starting to think of another mechanism that would allow businesses to retain their staff who are working, which is what I think what we're looking for.
Okay, and just the fund, whatever it's called, this would be Bank of England or Treasury money, what loans, grants,
I think the
some
problem
sort of credit scheme, what would it be?
Yeah, I think the problem that you've got with loans is that people have to pay them back, and at the moment, there's no date at which people would be able to say we'd be able to pay that back. So I think we are looking for a grant system. We saw in Scotland that the Scottish government announced a grant system for businesses that they felt were important in the future of Scotland's economy. And some of my members did receive some of that funding. That was significant funding as well, because of course they were able to demonstrate that inbound tourism into Scotland is a key part of Scotland's future economic prosperity. And I think we could do the same for the UK as well. It provides job, provides growth, it levels up, helps with the brand overseas, is linked with investment, education, trade. So there are a lot of things that we need to be able to impress upon government. And as I say, some of that is about educating government as well. We've got a really big issue here at the moment. We've got politicians who see the beaches of Brighton and Bournemouth being as busy as they are. They've issued the Eat Out to Save Out campaign. They've issued the VAT reductions, and they probably think everything's okay. Well, it's not. There's 450,000 employees involved in inbound tourism, and they're facing a very, very bleak future. So there is an element of government support. There's also an element of wider government education, and indeed I'd probably say media understanding. I don't count you within this, Ian, of course, but I'm talking about wider mainstream media understanding of the importance of inbound.
Yeah, okay. Clive, you're on mute. Oh, you're unmuted. Good. You have proposed, I can't remember what you called it now, repayable business support. Yeah. So as a replacement of furlough, but money to support the payroll, which would be paid back. What response have you had, if any, to that, and how would that work quickly?
Well, we're waiting for the response of the conversations to come back off of that right now. But I agree with everything Josh said, and I said it earlier that we understand furlough is not going to continue, but we need something to get us through to at least the end of the year, and then probably until Q1 for this industry. For my members, the biggest costs are property and then staff, and many are working on the property area. Staff is something that is much harder, and it has been great. The furlough or JR scheme has been really appreciated, but again we also miss out on business rates relief. We didn't come under the leisure hospitality sector either, that is what we need to get it through. We will have a dearth of staff, and it is all about people. This business is about knowledge and experience. That is going to leave the business. We can't afford to do that. Should the ramp up suddenly come quickly and we've lost all of our people, that then creates a further problem down the line. So it is really crucial that help is given around that area, and then we totally support working with the government and finding a way that it is either a grant or it's repayable in some way when profit comes in, if that's how it can work. But the biggest thing the government can help us with as industry is find a way to get people back travelling again, because that's ultimately what we need. And then the industry will look after itself, whether it's inbound or outbound. When we found a way of getting people to travel safely and confidently, then we are literally back in business, and everything starts picking up.
Okay, Susan, is Abta calling for anything specific in terms of a replacement for furlough or business rates relief, and do you see a prospect of any winter season?
Right, that's two big questions. Yes, so in terms of government support, I mean, looking at two areas. So starting with kind of Treasury and those kind of measures, what we need is, as my colleagues have said, something to support businesses through. January is traditionally the peak booking period. So something to support businesses through to there, and then to encourage customers to book. So how would that be done? Salary support, absolutely. I mean, furlough has been an extremely welcome opportunity, but we need to now move again to a more targeted measure for travel businesses. There's an Australian scheme which allows people to work, because obviously people who were furloughed were not allowed to work. We need people to be working. So we do need ongoing salary support, certainly to get us to the stage where bookings are starting to pick up again. And then in terms of, boosting confidence, incentivizing travel, asking for an APD holiday, certainly to go through into 2021. And then grants, recovery grants, specifically, I think would be most helpful for retail travel agents, small businesses. So along the lines of the grants that, occurred and were offered at the beginning as we were coming into this crisis. Those really are the three things. So salary support, APD holiday, and recovery grants. That's on the kind of Treasury fiscal side. Then government support on the restarting travel side and customer confidence. That's about all of these issues that we have been talking about. So continuing to engage with us and other stakeholders on things like moving away from the blanket approach, moving to the more targeted, regional, nuanced approach. On testing, absolutely. There's a DFT working group led primarily and understandably by the kind of airports and aviation side, because obviously they are the ones that are going to have the physical infrastructure where this testing will mainly be expected to take place. So looking at that, but recognising that that is not a single solution to these issues. And I do think we have to be pragmatic as well about how test and trace has been working just for us, and expanding that and availability, as well as making it available then for commercial means to allow people to travel. And all of that then moves us towards planning for a winter season. And certainly planning is already taking place. We're very focused on summer and all of the things that we've been discussing, but we are also looking towards winter, ski season, winter season. This is where we started in February, and looking ahead to what is required, not just in terms of any support that would be required for those businesses on all of the issues that we've been discussing, but also then specifically, my team looks at destination operations, crisis management, all of those issues. So what will be required for ski that may be different to what has been required for the summer destinations.
Okay, that's marvellous. I've got plenty more questions I want to ask you, but we're out of time. So I'm afraid we're going to have to finish there. Thank you so much for giving up your time today. Thank you, Susan Deere, Joss Croft, Clive Wratten. Great to talk to you, and I look forward to doing so again soon.
Excellent.
Thanks.
Bye all.
Bye.